let's also introduce our panelists. I thought I did that at the top of the hour, but of course for them that are joining us this morning, we can get to also show you our panelists, and we hear from them as well. Allow me to introduce to you Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who is a former Deputy Chair of the African Union, to talk to us. Also, we do have this morning Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, who is conflict resolution and also national security expert as well. We have also, as well, the Executive Director of Amnesty International. This is Irongo Houghton. We have Professor Naomi Damba. Professor Naomi Damba is the Vice Chancellor of KC University and an expert on foreign policy and defense. And introducing, I'll let her just speak for herself this morning, yeah? This is Dr. Njoki. Dr. Njoki, good morning.
Good morning.
Right. Maybe you want just to introduce yourself to our panelists this morning, who you are, and of course, you are an expert on security issues as well. Tell us more about yourself.
So I'm Njoki Wamai, Dr. Njoki Wamai, and I am an assistant professor at the United States International University, USIU, Africa. Yes, and it's a pleasure to be here with you.
All right. All right. So, family, what do you tell Njoki?
Karibu.
Welcome.
Welcome to the family.
Karibu Njoki.
Thank you so much. All right, let's just begin with Ambassador. We've seen this particular appointment, should I say, of the envoys, Raila Odinga, now it's Kalonzo, and it seems, how does this happen? Does it just happen willy-nilly? If I express an intention that I want to be a special envoy, will I have a sporting chance as Debarl?
Good morning, Debarl, and good morning, viewers. First of all, I think it's good news for Kenya because Kenya really should be playing that regional role of not only being an economic pillar. If you look at the African continent, one of the countries that is seen as an economic pillar is Kenya. But also going with it is Kenya's role that is very paramount in the area of peace and security. I mean, Kenya's had to send its young men and women to Somalia, to South Sudan, to you know, Liberia and all the, I mean, Sierra Leone. And I think this is very good news. What I see here, the joint monitoring team and evaluation team,
yes,
is usually a combination of the African Union, IGAD, South Sudan itself, and of course the two groups, SPLM in opposition and SPLM in government.
Yes.
And I think this is it must have been very carefully thought out because Kalonzo Musyoka is a very well-known figure in that area, having served as foreign minister, and during the time when the negotiations were very intensive that led to the birth of the new nation in 2005. I mean, that agreement, but of course, only the secession took effect in 2011. Unfortunately, South Sudan has not enjoyed peace at all.
Yes.
War broke out only after 2 years, and at the moment, the situation there is very bad. One of the sad aspects of South Sudan, really, which is abhorrent, is South Sudan today is in the league of Syria and Afghanistan in having so many people out of the country who have run away from the civil war. And so, and this is all because of war. If you look at the economic side of this, inflation has gone as high as almost 1,000, and there's a humanitarian crisis. And so he has his job cut out. And of course, I see him as a special envoy in that case, and replacing President Mugai. He will be reporting directly to Peace and Security Council of the African Union. I don't think this is an IGAD appointment as such, because that is outside the reach. Like President Mugai wouldn't have been appointed by IGAD, because that is way beyond IGAD.
Okay.
And so I see him very much occupied. It's a very tight job, having to walk that tightrope of bringing the two belligerents together in this peace process.
All right. So, in terms of remuneration, is it now within the domain of our government or the African Union? So, for Raila Odinga, for Kalonzo Musyoka, are we drawing from the exchequer, or is it coming maybe from the funds from the AU?
This is outside the government.
This is outside
the funds
the government.
come from the African Union. Yes.
All right, and of course we know also countries. We had the former chair, that is President Kagame, actually, belly aching somewhat, saying that countries are not, remitting, their, what do they call it, the quotas actually to the African Union Fund.
I think there is nothing very unusual about the kind of payments, and this is one of the projects that President Kagame, and even when we were there, we've been working on. If you remember, sometime almost close to 2 years ago, the African Union came up with a new formula that really goes like the European Union.
Yes.
That has now direct access to funds from taxation. And Kenya was one of the countries that started implementing it, 0.02% of imports. And what I know, President Uhuru Kenyatta was one of those that announced immediately, and they started. If you now see under Rotich's budget, this does not even come under allocation, it's direct. It goes to a special fund and goes to African Union.
All right.
And the Peace Fund is one of those that really was on the top of the agenda. And I know that there is nothing that you could say that the funds are a big problem. In fact, almost 25 countries are already implementing this formula, and I don't see this as a major impediment as of now.
Okay. All right. Dr. Mustafa, you want to comment on the new appointments? Of course, Kalonzo has been on this front before. We know he was on the shuttle diplomacy when we had also the ICC case as well. He was really globetrotting, trying to also mediate and trying to seek support on people to, really go against the ICC and the case against Uhuru Kenyatta and the Deputy President William Ruto. But now this particular honor that he's been awarded by the President, what do you think of it?
Yeah, Debarl, it's a good thing that Kenya is taking a lead in the region, trying to engage other countries in addressing peace issues, security issues, and conflicts in the region. That a Kenyan is actually going to be a leader in that regard after Festus Mugae's term ended. Now, South Sudan has been far much more violent after independence than it was before independence, and that country needs help. With regard to the appointment itself, yes, of course, I congratulate Kalonzo Musyoka for this appointment. However, I do not think that Kalonzo would do a good job and would engage in a sustained manner. Some of our politicians who are given these jobs, their eyes are always on the next election. So I'm not too sure how much he's going to pay attention to the challenges in South Sudan. There are many diplomats, there are many veteran diplomats, and we are sitting with one here, Ambassador Mwencha, who is not angling for any political seat in 2022. And there are many young people. Debarl, I'm just back from Egypt. I was in Sinai, and I was with the cabinet minister who is 26 years old from the United Arab Emirates, and it's a lady. And they, young people, are running things in some of those countries. I don't understand this obsession of having just to appoint very old people to. It's okay, they have the experience, but there are equally other people who are not politicians, diplomats that can do this work very well. There are also younger people that can actually engage and do this work very well. Yeah.
All right. Let's hear from Irungu Houghton. Good morning.
So I think, good morning. There are a couple of perspectives we could take. One, I think, of course, is this idea that Kenya is becoming more influential within the region. I think this is great. The second perspective is, or the question we could ask is, are our opposition, our veteran opposition politicians being externalized? So the first was Raila, second is Kalonzo, is Mudavadi heading to Southern Africa? Is Orengo about to be made an appointment?
Yeah,
I think why this is important is, or Nigeria, why this is important essentially is that we know our politics very well. our politics are really formed around individuals, very powerful personalities, not political parties. So the parties are de-institutionalized. Once you remove the personality, you know, what happens to the electoral space in this period? So I think that's the second question that's kind of interesting. What's the implication? Does this mean that there will be a younger group of politicians who will now begin to flex their muscles and provide public service and leadership for the country? Does it mean that the institutions, the political parties will get stronger or will they get weaker? And I think this is the second part of this. But I think if Kalonzo Musyoka was watching me now, what I would say is that there are really kind of three things he could concentrate on. The first is to ensure that all political prisoners, including Peter Biar Ajak, are released immediately. Secondly, that an environment is created for democratic, I guess, democratic processes to emerge within that country. I think there is a real feeling that the peace accord was really an accord among elites. And that once you have 5, you know, is it 4 or 5 deputy presidents, that essentially what you're doing is power sharing. But actually the most important interest there, which is the population of South Sudan, have no interest in this process. Ordinary people have no interest in this process yet. So I think this would be the 2 agenda items that I would give him. And I would ask him, if he's looking for inspiration, let him look to Ethiopia. This week, we saw something fairly unprecedented, not just for the East Africa region, but for the continent, which is the arrest of 36 very high-profile military and intelligence officers for crimes against humanity and human rights violations. And I think what I've been interested in to see in Ethiopia is how does Abiy create a democratic state after almost a decade, if not more, of autocracy, or, if we're being polite, illiberal democracy. And I think that would be enough inspiration, I think, for Kalonzo to actually make a difference so that he's not left when his term comes up with really a feeling of despair and defeat.
Right, and of course you were actually wondering what Musali, and this is what the Sky is holding. Maybe also that meeting is yeah, in the offing. It has been in the offing. This is maybe to give him also another role as well. So the opposition, it seems, yeah, they're being given...
They've been courted. Courtship is underway.
The question is, are they this hungry for positions?
Good question.
Are they hungry? Right. Let's hear from Professor Adnoamidamba. What do you think?
Debarl, while agree with the sentiment rightly expressed by my friends Mustafa and Irungu, I think the president is wise to use every citizen at his disposal. I think the old hand and the knowledge these people have is immensely valuable if it is used right and in the right place. And so I think the big question that Kenyans need to ask is what's the outcome, what's the role of these people, and how does it benefit the country and the region? And therefore, this responsibility must not be taken for granted and must not be used as a platform for the next election.
Thank you very much. And of course, this is in light of what he's actually talking about. On the front page of the Star, I can just give you a snippet of why Kalonzo was in Sudan. Kalonzo in Juba, you read this. He says, despite murmurs from his party, Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka began work yesterday as special peace envoy. Kalonzo, accompanied by Foreign Affairs CS Monica Juma, flew to Juba and delivered Uhuru's congratulatory message to President Salva Kiir for implementing new peace agreement. This story is on page 6 of the Star. New peace agreement, and we thought also predicated on this particular agreement, was the release of political prisoners. Some of them have been released, but some haven't. And I know also Irungu Houghton has mentioned Peter Biar Ajak. Peter Biar Ajak has been a panelist on Standing on Guard, and we've been talking about this. Now it is 3 months and 15 days since he was actually arrested and put in the slumbers in South Sudan. And right now, he has not been taken to court. We don't know, what the charges are. This actually is a website where some of the classmates from Harvard University and Cambridge University actually opened up for people to sign petition for Peter Dr. Peter Biar Ajak's release. And just a snippet of them that are joining us and they are not aware and they're not in the loop. Peter Biar Ajak was arrested in South Sudan on July 28th. Peter is a youth advocate for peace and a friend and inspiration to many who know him around the world. He is currently being held without charge at the notorious South Sudanese prison known as the Blue House. His friends at university, human rights institutions, media organizations and others around the world are calling for his release. Peter's arrest comes amid a worrying trend in arbitrary detentions due to a crackdown on freedom of expression by South Sudanese government. Amnesty International reports numerous recent arrests without charges. This goes against South Sudan's constitution, which states no one can be held without charge for more than 24 hours. So this has been 3 months right now since he was arrested. Peter was one of the lost boys of the South Sudan, displaced during the war when he was young. He lived in refugee camps before being taken to the United States by humanitarian charities. Once in the US, he learned English and studied hard, securing a place at the LaSalle University, then completed a master's at Harvard before joining for PhD at Cambridge University in the UK. His inspirational story was recognized when he became an Atlantic Council Millennium Fellow and Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellow. In June, Peter was awarded the Crans Montana Forum's New Leader for Tomorrow Award by His Excellency Moussa Traoré, former president of Mali. Peter has always kept his focus on South Sudan and his hope for a peaceful future for his country. He has worked in think tanks, his national government and institutions working for development and peace. He has dedicated himself for creating opportunities for dialogue among Sudan or South Sudan young, that is South Sudan youth, running wrestling tournaments across the country to bring young people together and to celebrate South Sudan's unique culture. And he formed the South Sudan Young Leaders Forum, bringing together young leaders, both men and women, from across ethnicities and politics to encourage youth throughout the countryside to embrace peaceful dialogue. Up to now, I think we are at 78,815 people who have actually signed this petition. The target is 150,000 and still this is ongoing. But I want now to rope in also Dr. Njoki Wamai, who was also a former classmate of Peter Biar Ajak, just to give us a snippet of what is really the current state of play as far as Peter is concerned. You're with Peter at Cambridge. Just bring us up to speed on what is happening and right now, what is the way forward? Talking about Special Envoy Kalonzo to now South Sudan. This was also a pact on the new peace agreement that yes, they should release political prisoners. We've had some who have been released, but others have not been released. And of course, the breakout from the Blue House also, that really also added another tripwire to, maybe the release of Peter Biar Ajak.
Yes, Peter and I studied at the University of Cambridge. We actually are very close because we share a supervisor, a PhD supervisor.
Yes.
Dr. Sharad Srinivasan. And so he's like my brother academically. And many of us, when I was in Cambridge, of course, they continue to have, the university first is very concerned. The student community, and I think also Harvard, where he studied. As you can see, he's quite an inspiring person, having been a lost boy, participated in the war, gone to the US, studied, and gone to Harvard and Cambridge. And one thing about Peter, he was always focused on the ball, South Sudan. Even when we were at Cambridge, half the time he was in South Sudan, trying to organize this youth meeting or the other. So his passion for change in this country was quite and it continues to be quite evident. And I think he's going to be one of the change makers and continues to be a change maker. And probably that's part of the reason that the authorities found that they, kind of want to limit him. And so I would ask Kalonzo Musyoka, I think that's, especially on Peter Biar Ajak, that's one of the main, I think, focus that he should focus on, not just him, and of course the others who've been arrested, arbitrary detention. It's quite a number of people. And because if we're going to have a democratic South Sudan, I think that is one of the things that we must focus on, the ending of arbitrary detention. The national security in the glue house, and the kind of things going on there, torture. So that needs to be dealt with, and I think that should be one of his focus, in addition to the rest of the issues in the peace agreement. And especially, there are so many people now, it's been 3 months. We thought it was a joke initially, and so we hope that we probably now having a high-level diplomat like Kalonzo get in, we can bring more traction to this, yes.
Right. And let's just hear from Ambassador, because this matter also has been taken by East Africa, Court of Justice to help free Juba political prisoners, one of which is also Peter Biar Ajak. And we had the Arusha-based Pan-African Lawyers Union, which went to the East African Court of Justice to force the South Sudanese government to release political detainees. We don't know an update on this as well. But from the African Union perspective, when we have such cases and we have a violation of a constitution, when we have 24 hours for you actually to be, produced in court, and this has not really happened, then what is the way forward?
Yeah, Debarl, it's a very complex situation for South Sudan because the fragility of that nation is worrisome. I was briefed to the report that was prepared by President Obasanjo, looking at, the violation of human rights that were committed by both sides during this war that started in 2013. And one of the worrying aspects was the lack of respect. I mean, if you see how, for instance, the women have suffered under that situation, the children that have been drafted into it, and wanton destruction of property and all aspects of human rights is indeed a situation that puts South Sudan as a spectre to all of us in the world, to challenge us, because if indeed they want to be members of East African community, there must be some modicum of as Irungu was saying, of democracy. And one of the tenets of even of African Union is you must respect human rights. That's as one of the tenets that we really espouse. And I would really, through this, make a challenge and to international community, to the African Union and other leaders, to continue to put pressure on the leadership of South Sudan, first of all, to implement that peace accord in earnest. And in that situation, if that prevails, we should start to see the release of all prisoners, addressing the issue of human rights, bringing to justice those that have committed, like the case that was mentioned in Ethiopia. My worry, and based on what even Njoka has just told us, is whether, and we have said this before, that there is any willingness on the part of this current leadership to address this seriously. That's why I see Kalonzo Musyoka's really job cut out to try and impress on them to move forward and bring peace. I mean, the country went through 25 years of war, of liberation. Only 2 years they went into conflict, and even during those 2 years, there was not much done. All there was fighting for who was controlling the petroleum docket and who was going to steal what money. All this money is out of the country. The country has not had any peace for the last 30 or 50 years. It's a sad situation. And that is a country that you can call a country for integration. It's serious, actually.
All right, Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, Debarl, we've said here on this panel before that South Sudan basically at the moment is a basket case. It's shameful that the country just went to war immediately after getting independence.
Even with the new peace agreement?
Yes, it's still a basket case, Debarl. There is no guarantee that peace agreement is going to hold. Many peace agreements have been signed by the leaders in South Sudan, and shortly thereafter they've reneged on that, and people have been, or rather warlords have new warlords have been created. Who knew that Paul Malong was going to start fighting the government itself that he was serving for such a long time? Already we see that there are elements of not meeting or you know, the part of bargains from either Riek Machar or Salva Kiir. The fact that Peter Biar Ajak is still incarcerated without any charge, and yet the peace agreement says that all political prisoners must be released, is appointed, that those guys are not serious, and they have to get serious, Debarl. I do not think that the current leadership in South Sudan is going to take that country further than they already have. We thank them, the South Sudanese, I believe, thank them for the work they've done liberating that country. It's about time that they really consider nurturing another set of leaders that is not militarized, that are not from the bush. You know, fighting an insurgency and in the bush is a different game from governing a country that is now independent. Salva Kiir and Riek Machar are supposed to be statesmen that are now advising a leadership, a new leadership that is in South Sudan. I hope that the next things they are going to do, and Kalonzo Musyoka is really going to plead with those two leaders, is to release Peter Biar Ajak and all the other political prisoners, and then move that country, even if it's a 5-year plan, that is going to have a change of leadership in that country, Debarl. South Sudan is actually not a poor country. It has a lot of resources, and it can move. Indeed, it was actually just starting to move. But now I think everything is still at a standstill, and it's going to take time.
All right. Let's hear from Irungu Houghton, because according to Amnesty International report that was published in September under the title "A Trail of Broken Promises," South Sudanese authorities have arbitrarily arrested, detained, tortured and ill-treated people to the point of death, despite repeated promises to release detainees. And it says people in South Sudan have been arrested for their political and ethnic affiliations and are then subjected to an unimaginable suffering, sometimes leading to death at the hands of the government security forces. This is according to that is Saif Magango, Amnesty International's Deputy Director for East Africa, the Horn and the Great Lakes. And of course, these were sentiments also that were agreed, or maybe it was in concert with Sarah Jackson as well, of Amnesty International South Sudan as well. From that particular standpoint, and I think also you have a sort of an agent trying to push the envelope. Aside from this particular report, what are you doing as Amnesty International? I think also Sudan, Amnesty International South Sudan had picked an interest on Peter Biar Ajak's case.
Fear of being harassed for one's political views, for expressing a view on public affairs and how resources should be used, fighting corruption, all the things that across the continent are essentially part of our development now, are completely denied within the southern part of Sudan, or South Sudan as we now formally call it. I think the report that we did in September, which of course came before the peace accord, still stands. Many of the people that we were concerned about still remain in, and Peter, I think, is just one of those people. Yes. I think that report needs to be read in context of, or rather in conjunction with the recent UN panel of experts report that was released in the last 48 hours. That basically demonstrates that not only has the arms embargo been violated in the last 2 months during the time that the peace accord was being negotiated, but also that sexual violence, human rights violations have taken place in the, I guess, in the shadows of the negotiations for the peace accord. And I think for me, what that often suggests is that a behavioral shift has not yet happened. Until that happens, I think Ambassador is correct, and I think Jockey is correct to point out that until there is a very steady path towards a democratic process within South Sudan, you are not going to see anything but leaders who are basically walking wounded continue to inflict violence on each other, and more importantly, to inflict violence on large numbers of people. So I think that's the context in which we work. The other thing that I think we should be concerned about really is how the interests within South Sudan have externalized themselves across the different economies of the region. So, for example, the timber industry for the last many years now, the militias have actually been funded by essentially the timber industry, which I think is worth something between $10 and $11 million, and that has actually fueled the war. So I think what we need to think about as neighbors and friends of South Sudan is how do we close the taps for the militia groups to ensure that they are not able to prosecute their differences through military means, but now have to come to a democratic way of negotiating. And if they can be turned into political parties without military wings, that is the, I guess that is the way forward for a democracy.
Thank you. And just maybe to ask you also, because he has been deprived of fair trial by the National Security Service in South Sudan right now, and this is, as I mentioned, 3 months down the line, a violation of course, his rights. Well detained, the facilities there inhumane. There is a blue house. We know about how torture is done in that particular house as well. But the question will be, was his only crime the IGAD-led peace process analysis that he did? Or, because I think that one really triggered, and many people are suspicious of that particular IGAD-led, and I think this is the one that actually led to this particular peace that we do have here. That he was really against the bloated government of South Sudan.
I mean, we can speculate, but actually court of law, a court of law essentially operates under very strict rules. You have to be accused, you have to face your accuser, and you must have the right to defend yourself. None of this has happened in the context of Peter. So I would prefer not to speculate, but to simply say that Peter is not yet charged, he is innocent of all charges, and should be released. Or he should be placed in a court of law and availed with lawyers and legal advice and be able to defend himself. Until that happens, there is no charge against Peter. He is he has simply been arrested arbitrarily and without any due process of law.
Okay, so what is the way forward, Noami Damba?
Debarl, unfortunately, as my colleagues here correctly stated, South Sudan has taken the ugly path of DRG Congo. It's a basket case. The leadership and the people in Southern Sudan are not serious. There is an extremely great pressure from outside, from small arms dealers to other natural resources to petroleum product. And so I think we need to come to realize the very existence of AU and what its purpose is all about. We need to take a look at East Africa and say who need to join us, under what criteria. We need to see the role that IGAD is playing, and South Sudan, the message is under no uncertain. Could you be a humble members of this union?
Thank you.
Unless you correct yourself.
Thank you, Professor. Of course, we want to take a short break right now. We'll circle back, we continue a bit with that, and of course look at what is happening, of course, around the world as far as security is concerned. You're watching Standing on Guard, where we keep an eye on the enemy. As we're taking a short break, Wayne Chavulimu Kalika is saying for sustainable peace to be achieved in South Sudan, justice must be realized in tandem. Political prisoners, human rights must be pursued. Peter Ajak and other political prisoners must be freed. Right, we'll take a short break right now. When we circle back, we continue the discussion and a lot of other issues as well as far as security is concerned. Don't go away. Right, welcome back. You're watching Standing on Guard, where we're keeping an eye on the enemy. Of course, we continue apace with the conversation. We're still advocating for the release of Peter Biar, Ajak, who is one of our panelists. If you're joining us, Peter Biar, Ajak has been a very vocal panelist here as far as South Sudan security issues are concerned. There's still this particular website, that is the change.org, that is seeking, of course, to get petitions. Right now it is standing at 78,815. The target is 150 to actually seek the release of Peter Biar, Ajak, who is, I mentioned and I read lengthily on who he's all about. And of course also information trickling into our studios, of course, is telling us, yes, his health is deteriorating right now. He's still in the slumbers and he has no access to his family. They cannot visit, so we have no sorting idea on what is happening actually with Peter Biar, Ajak way back in South Sudan. So what is the way forward? And closely, earlier on we introduced Dr. Njoki Wamai, who was a classmate of Peter Biar, Ajak at Cambridge University, where he was pursuing his PhD. And Njoki, we know this could be quite frustrating, but I know the efforts from Harvard University, efforts from also Cambridge University, they're bearing fruits so far. And of course, we had the New York, that was the UNGA, the United Nations convention in New York, and you were expected to present a petition to the Secretary General of the United Nations as far as this is concerned. Were you in any way, if you're privy to this particular information, what mileage did you make on that particular front? And if we get this petition, then what?
I think from the beginning we've had like two strands or two dilemmas,
yes,
on how to go around activism around freeing Peter. And initially, of course, we started externally, I mean, especially in Cambridge and in the US, making a lot of noise. And then we had his brother and his wife, Nyathon, in South Sudan advised us that maybe because the authorities in South Sudan might think that, you know, there's a problem, we may want to tone down the activism around that, so that it doesn't seem like an external pressure, Western influence and that kind of thing. So there has been also a lot of dilemmas around that. I knew about the petition. I think the petition will be important just again to bring more traction on why this is important and why Peter needs to be free. As we've had news just in, his health is deteriorating from Nyathon, his wife, and so so we need to urgently do something, and I hope the new and special envoy to South Sudan can focus on the political prisoners.
All right. Okay, so that is the case. If you've not really signed the petition, and if you're aware of Peter Biar, Ajak, in a moment we'll just run the clip by you so that you can get to hear what he had to say maybe about that particular IGAD, of course, led process for the peace in South Sudan, where we had this particular now current government that is really bloated right now. But that you can head over to www.change.org, Freedom for Peter Biar, Ajak, where the petition, as I mentioned before, it is 78,815 who have signed so far. And you can read the rest of his details over here. Maybe as we're wrapping up on this, Ambassador Esses Moncha, yes, given that his health is deteriorating right now, that should be a worry.
And that is a clear violation of human rights, because at least they should take him to the hospital. And I think, just to echo what Njoki said, we saw a lot of international community around the concern of Khashoggi and the others. And I think this is what we would really advocate for, that we should really put pressure, maximum pressure, to South Sudan to embark on a new chapter if they are serious about this peace deal. And one of them is to free all the political prisoners. If not, let them be isolated then.
Right. Lastly, Mustafa?
Yeah, again, Debarl, we are not going to tire in asking the government of South Sudan to immediately and without any condition release Peter Biar Ajak, and they are holding him against the law. There is no charge that has been brought before the courts in South Sudan or any other court in this world against Peter Biar Ajak. If they really care about human beings, they should release Peter Biar Ajak.
Right, and of course we shall be doggedly following also that particular case that was filed by the East African Courts of Justice, and we get the latest development on that. As I mentioned, that the Russia-based Pan-African Lawyers Union has also gone to the East African Court of Justice to force the South Sudan government to release political detainees, one of whom is Peter Biar Ajak, and the government is accused of denying the detainees access to their families, lawyers and doctors. They are confined and given 1 meal per day. And also, since Mr. Ajak's arrest, the campaign hashtag Free Peter Biar has generated considerable support online, and Mr. Ajak has been the leading voice of the civil society in South Sudan, calling for generational change as the only way for peace to come to South Sudan. And he has been here before when he made a presentation about the generation exits. Maybe this is what the government of South Sudan don't really want to hear. It's time maybe the old coots should pass the baton to the young, fresh, people who are forward-looking, and they're visionary for this particular country, aside from people who are coming with all these baggages, from history in South Sudan. Maybe Irongo, you can actually comment on that briefly as we're winding up on this.
So I think for the leaders that are watching this show this morning, I think there are a number of things that I would speak to them on. One is that over the last 90 days, there has been a clear, demonstrable public concern at the condition of Peter and other political prisoners. As we're hearing, he needs medical attention, he also needs access to a lawyer, and he needs general access from his family and loved ones. But more importantly than that, he needs to be released. So I think that should be the call to action for diplomats within this region. And I'm sure, because I know your program is very popular, Debarl, that there are member state officers of the South Sudanese government watching this program as well. And I think we can appeal to them also that this is not in the interests of the peace accord. It is not in the interests of the normalization of South Sudanese democracy. And I think as the UN Security Council meets on Friday, I think those people, and there are a few UN diplomats in Nairobi at the moment, that they need to really make sure that this agenda is brought to the UN Security Council alongside the violation of the arms embargo. I think the African Union needs to publicly now make its intentions clear, and I think that's another area that we could perhaps focus on alongside our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the newly appointed UN envoy, Kalonzo Musyoka. So these would be the pressure points, I think, towards essentially removing this clot, this blur, this shadow over the peace accord.
All right. I want to also take you back maybe to what was on the front page of the East African as well. This is about Congo, just to get the latest development in Congo. We'll be also running you by that particular clip by Peter Biar Ajak much later in the course of the program. But let's see also what is happening across the region. Of course, we know about the election in DRC, opposition seeking single candidate, a plan for, they plan, however, not to back, not backed by a candidate who opinion polls show is popular. Of course, we'll just read you a story that this is happening in DR Congo. But this is the letters that we have so far. Opposition parties in December in Democratic, I should say, Republic of Congo were working on a formula to back a single candidate to face off with the government in December 23rd elections. I'm still waiting for my intro to just give you also a clip of that particular story that we can actually continue. This is a full report that continues on page 13 of the Daily Nation, the East African this week. So let's just comment on what is happening right now, but we can run you by the pictures if we don't have the intro to just show you how it was as well and the way they're seeking. Ambassador, this is Professor Nomidamba. Let's continue with you. The development in Congo, DR Congo, the elections should be December 23rd?
The DRG Congo has been a basket case since Patrick Lumumba and continued that way. And unfortunately, South Sudan is taking a very similar path. The point is there is incredible pressure from outside Congo, of armed dealers to drug dealers to thugs that are selling all kind of natural resources taken out of Congo. The most unfortunate thing is this is a country that can be a breadbasket for the entire continent of Africa. And you know, the leaders of Congo, these folks are welcome in the African continent capitals with the red carpets and champagne and everything. We cannot continue accepting this kind of behavior, both in Sudan and also in Congo. There has to be a criteria and a commitment to create a civil government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Or they demonstrably state that they're following other system that we don't know. That is what Africa need to do.
All right, Ambassador Erastus Wencha, Tshisekedi to be the single candidate now, and of course the controversy around him as well has been rife, hasn't it?
Well, as Noah said, I think the good news is that finally we are going to see an election. Although there are some issues around the election, the opposition is not very comfortable with the use of these electronic gadgets. But at least we have an election that has been delayed for more than 2 years now, and that the constitution has been respected, because that was one of the contentions, that President Kabila didn't want to respect the constitution, that he had already served 2 terms, and that it was time for him to leave the stage. But having said that, I think on the opposition, they met, I think in Geneva, a couple of days ago, and elected one businessman to be the flag bearer. And even before the ink could dry up, they are already fighting over this choice. Oh, yeah. Tshisekedi's son has already says no, he wants to be a candidate because I think through opinion polls, it shows that he's a popular person. But you can see this kind of mentality, and I think, you know, as Noah was saying, the country has never really been a nation, because first of all it's too bulky, it has no infrastructure, there is no, they haven't felt that oneness. And I think it's going to remain in this kind of limbo for some time to come. But let's pray that this election takes place, there is peace, and that we can move on.
We can move on. Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah. Debarl, another basket case, just like South Sudan is DR Congo. First of all, what Ambassador has said, that these guys, the opposition, first of all, they go to Geneva to go and agree on a common candidate. All the way in Geneva, Europe is part of the problem, is what really caused the problem in DRC that we are seeing today. They are now fielding 21 presidential candidates. Which country on earth, other than I think Somalia last time, was trying to field 21 presidential candidates? Now, Emmanuel Shadari, who is Kabila's choice, is going to win. Oh, and we know that country has been plunged into problems, and they needed a change. Now, the fact that they went for a compromise candidate instead of developing a consensus, mean the opposition is going to lose. And now already they have disagreed over even that candidate that they were going to pick as a compromise. And the other thing is that
they're not really agreeing on.
No, they have not. They agreed, and then they've gone back against their own agreement. And the fact that, well, Emmanuel Shadari, who is Kabila's choice, is going to use state's resources and power to basically just win, maybe rig to become president. This is a really sad situation. DR Congo is one of geographical accidents on this world. given the kind of resources that it has, Debarl. It has $34 trillion worth of minerals, just 1 meter beneath its soil. And it's one of the poorest countries in the world. It is saddening.
What a paradox. Of course, the geopolitics around it as well. People will see their instability so that they can thrive in the profiteering from this, of course, wars as well. But let's hear from... yes.
So there are a couple of things. I think for me, the you know, when we define a country as a basket case, what does that mean for ordinary people? So in the case of Congo, in the last month or so, there are two things that I think, you know, everybody can recognize as symptoms of a basket case. If you cannot protect 200 people from Ebola and an outbreak, and you are basically reliant on the international community to protect yourself from this deadly, deadly disease, that for me is an example of a basket case. If you have thousands of children under the age of 7 working in mines, swallowing toxic dust from mining of cobalt, the metals that are in all our smartphones here, and you can't protect children from child labor, that is an example of a basket case. If you cannot hold elections without having to clamp down on civil society, the media, and essentially stop any political protests on the streets of Kinshasa, that is another example of a basket case. And I think this is, you know, these are the consequences of not getting our politics right in Africa. That if we cannot find ways of ensuring that electoral democracy is the means by which we confer leadership, we confer resources, and we confer, I guess, responsibility, then you will have these, these disasters happening the whole time. And I think DRC, for me, has an opportunity in the next month or so to rectify essentially what many of us have been feeling for a long time, that the country is heading in the wrong direction. But I think that the message for the political opposition is that if they do not come together, and I speak not as Amnesty here, but really as a political analyst, if they do not come together and find a common candidate, then they are going to find themselves in a position that Kenyans found themselves for several decades in the 90s.
Right. Let's hear from Dr. Njoki.
I think even looking at both countries, DRC, and also tying back to what's going on in South Sudan and the crisis of the state in Africa, it's something I think we need to think about. Elite bargains. How do people even get to power? It's half the time about elites coming together and bargaining over power, like they're doing in Geneva, interestingly. And so the people are so distant, even in when these people agree, not just even in DRC, even back here in Kenya. And so we need to rethink about the state. How do people get power? You talked about even liberation leaders, Mustafa. Having all these liberation types come, again, most of the time is elite bargaining, political settlements that do not seem to resonate as much as, of course, in terms of performance, they resonate to the ordinary people because they have perfected also that art of speaking to what the ordinary people want. But at the end of the day, it's more of elite bargains and settlements between each other. And so till we go back to how do we make the African state? And the ambassador here should be good to hear, especially having served the African Union for a long time. Yeah.
So this is sort of the deep state and the state capture. When you're talking about elite bargaining, is like, you know, a nation is a product that we are beginning over products, and this is your maybe, you know, this is sort of your beginning power on the negotiating table. This is what you offer, this is what I offer, and we are people who are suffering in between, like products who are just being, you know, towing and, you know, being taken towing and throwing on these negotiations. Maybe we can hear from Professor Midamba.
Well, if you look at the world reconfiguration right now, with Trump taking up extreme role, Europe is working hard to go back to protect the interest of Union. And every element, every member of the Union has to agree on certain principles which govern the way Europe needs to be. We have AU, okay, and I'm saying, instead of saying, all right, you know, these elites are fighting, they are going to Geneva to have champagne and have nice dinner and figure out how to split DRG Congo, who's take what. But let's be serious about Africa. Let's be serious who is a member of Africa and who is honorable person that need to be welcome in our capital. And unless that is done, these guys are going to continue, and they're all kind of thugs running around loose, calling themselves this and that. So that has to stop. Africa has to be serious about Africa.
All right.
I mean, there's a funny story. It's actually true, Debarl, if I can tell you the story. Back in 1991, a phone call was placed to a senior civil society activist who later on went to become a senior jurist in this country. And the phone call went like this. It said, I'm thinking of forming a party, and I would like you to be the Secretary General. So the civil society activist said, thank you very much, but I think I'd like to be the chairperson. And the person who called said, that job would be mine, but let me call you back. And never called him back. Never called him back. And I've always thought that's probably the best example of how these trade-off deals happen. You know, that when we talk about building a consensus, it's usually to start off with not a conversation about common values or even common vision or what is it we're trying to achieve. It's simply how do we offer seats to each other so that we can all be at the table. And I think in many ways, as people think about political craft or mastery of political craft, they need to go beyond, you know, defining a party, a bit like, you know, like a household party, you know, like you'd say, let's go for a party. You know, sometimes I think when people are talking about let's form a party, they're actually talking in the context of like, let's go have some drinks, you know, and let's go and eat some nyama choma together. And I think for me, until that is corrected, the intelligentsia, who really were the leadership behind the anti-colonial movement. They were the people that took us into the 1960s. They had vision for this country. They were thinking much more broader than themselves. That intelligentsia somehow seems to be absent from the political debates that we're seeing on the continent now.
Right.
And just to build on what Irungu is saying, I think Musyoka has raised a fundamental point here that in Africa, did we really go beyond a flag that we call a nation and having an army and some token elections in some cases? Creating a nation state, as Irungu was saying, you must have that common understanding of where as a nation you are going and agree. The Americans fought to create the United States of America because they all came as individuals, but then they found this common tone that finally they said, let's build a nation. And you find an American is an American first before he's a Californian and the rest. We are nations of tribes, and we have never gone beyond that tribal thinking, and that is how we come in with all these warlords who come in with the, get all this team that they can now negotiate and form these elitist groups that create a collection of nations and not a nation state. I lived in Zambia, and the motto there was, one Zambia, one nation. And you could see that the leadership at that time was conscious that having inherited this colonial state which was divide and rule, you needed to jail the people. And we worked around that you finally could have a semblance of a nation. But even after independence, somebody who wrote a book and said, a false start. We just came from the bush of struggle for independence and created nation states and not a nation state.
We actually created ethnic nationality, ethnic nations within, trying to superimpose them within the nation state.
Musyoka is being very polite.
Yes.
We have ethnic nationalism and we have ethnic these are tribal entrepreneurs. Let's just call it for what they are most. Starting in Kenya, we're seeing a little bit of that it's been in Ethiopia. I don't know about Uganda, Somalia, you know, clan entrepreneurs. Africa has to, you know, the Nuers and the Dinkas. It's about tribal entrepreneurship and how much money they can steal and come and spend on the streets of Nairobi. We see that, you know, a very venal kind of behavior from so-called African leaders.
Right. Finally on it.
Africa need to reassess itself vis-a-vis the world, whether it is China or the US or European. We can no longer continue to have Francophone and Anglophone. We can no longer continue to have tribal warlords in this place. We can no longer continue to accept these people who are thugs, literally thugs, by red carpet and everything, and agree that, you know, let's continue. This has to stop. It's enough is enough.
Right, thank you. And we have reactions also on Twitter. Let's just read some of them here. Abdullah Mudambo is asking, what is the African Union doing about the situation in South Sudan? Innocent people are suffering a lot. Also, we have John Gidanga saying, Mobutu Seseko aggravated DRC's wars after the post-independence conflict between the leftist-inclined Patrice Lumumba and Joseph Kasavubu. Since then, this vast natural resources-rich country remains in murky waters. Also, we have Dan Iberi saying, Kiir and Machara aren't true patriots. They don't love their country. True patriotism is about honestly coming together for their citizens' common good. It's building mansions in the suburb of Juba, not in Nairobi or Kampala. We have also Ed saying, we need a complete overhaul of the African leader. What we know to be good characteristics, I should say, of a leader have for a long time not resonated with any African leader. What we have are dictators, despots, and detractors of true development. Africa is doomed. And then we have Simeon Kalu Lepario saying something is absolutely wrong with these two guys in South Sudan, that is Kiir and Machar. Both should leave power and let the country be governed by young people for the betterment of the future generation. And also we have, this is Pastor Peter saying, this habit of recycling people into job positions hurt the young learned generation. Until when? That is also a concerned person there. Abdullah Mudam was saying, it seems like the fruits of being the president's handboy are already yielding fruits for Kalonzo. Of course, this is in light of what we were discussing before and what is on the front pages, or the front page of most of the dailies as far as Kalonzo appointment is concerned. But let's see what is happening in Sudan right now. And Sudan has welcomed a U.S. announcement that Washington is willing to remove Khartoum from its blacklist of state sponsors of terrorism and it said it was ready to cooperate. The U.S. State Department on Wednesday said, or today actually, said Washington was prepared to initiate the process of rescinding Sudan's designation as a state sponsor of terrorism if Khartoum undertakes more reforms. It called on Sudan to engage in further anti-terrorism cooperation and improve its human rights record and act on outstanding claims related to terrorism, as well as work to resolve international conflicts. Let's listen in.
As part of this
development. We can begin from there with Dr. Mustafa. This particular announcement by the U.S., what do you make of it?
Yes, certainly a welcome move, Debarl. My only contention in this case is the definition of terrorism. You know, you have one country deciding to label another country as a sponsor of terrorism. You know, what definition do they use? What is it? You know, remember here, it's not the United Nations that actually considered Sudan as a country that is sponsoring terrorism. There have been issues in Sudan. That we have to recognize. But the idea that one country can stand up and label others terrorists is something to me that is quite obnoxious. There are many countries that are sponsoring terrorism. Yes. We've seen terrorism being sponsored by European countries in Africa, including, and I'm not talking about 10 years ago, I'm talking about, you know, decades ago when, you know, basically countries trained mercenaries to come and kill Africans and to really terrorize Africans that were fighting for independence. Let us not look at terrorism from only U.S. perspective or Euro-centric, in a Eurocentric sense. We need to look at terrorism from a global perspective. It's a huge problem that is challenging the entire world, and if it's not addressed properly and only addressed in a picky manner, the way some powerful states have been doing so, then it's not going to be resolved.
Right. Let's hear from Ambassador.
Just to jog our memory back, how it started was that allegation that Osama bin Laden had trained in Sudan, and that Sudan therefore was a sponsor of terrorism, from what Mustafa is saying. But don't forget that Osama bin Laden was actually bribed by the U.S. itself, ironically, trained by the U.S. And then, of course, the U.S., in the process of saying that Sudan was making some chemical weapons targeted the pharmaceutical industry. I had visited that pharmaceutical industry personally when I used to be director of industries in the region, and so I knew it, and I went back to see it in ashes. Supposedly a place.
Yes.
The relationship has never been the same. There was a lot of effort even under Obama to regularize this relationship, and there have always been these shifting goals of conditions that South Sudan must meet for it to be taken off the list of the U.S. South Sudan has been able to bust some of those sanctions because South Sudan now uses the Middle East to trade its oil, to get its cash, and so business as usual. So even if you remove it at this point in time, which is a good thing, because there was never really a good proof to show that it was a sponsor of terrorism as such. But of course, that said, there were other aspects which they talked about in the case of human rights, and we know that even African Union has had issues with the South Sudan on human rights, and that has been always the case, even indictment of the president. So that is okay, but as he says, this question of one state being able to declare another a terrorist and impose sanctions and move on, is that dispensation should be challenged.
Right. Okay, let's say from Irungu Houghton briefly on it so that we can move on.
So I wanted to touch on the refugee story, if that's okay, Debarl. So I think for Amnesty, we've been very concerned about the emerging U.S. policy on refugees, not just globally, but also domestically within the U.S. context. The Trump administration has basically declared that they will only accept 45,000 people into the United States of America. And at the current moment, it's probably going to be about 25,000. Now, if you imagine this is the lowest number since 1980. And in a context where you have millions of people on the run and essentially trying to escape persecution or running for safety, my question has always been really, how do we have a situation where one of the most powerful countries in the world is actually turning its back on the most vulnerable? So I think that, for me, is the first thing. And really, when you see the armed guard essentially building fortresses or other walls of barbed wire around the United States border, one wonders really whether you're creating a big prison. where people may not be able to get out unless they have visas and passports, but more importantly, people who need to seek refuge may not be able to get in. So Fortress America seems to be now the foreign policy in terms of refugees. And for us in Kenya, we have had decades of solidarity and generosity to people who have been fleeing persecution and violence, the Sudanese, the Somalis. So I think for Kenyans, this is a very strange development from such a powerful country. And if you allow me just one last thing, 2 days ago we stripped our ambassador of conscience, Aung San Suu Kyi, of her ambassador of conscience award for essentially turning her back on the Rohingya people and stopping and failing to protect the Muslim population from persecution. Something like about 600,000 people have been on the run, essentially facing religious persecution. And I think what we need to see much more now is robust action within the United Nations, within the different intergovernmental bodies, but even I think from non-governmental organizations. We need to be saying this is not the leadership our world deserves and calling them out.
Right, maybe we can also comment on the Tanzania's move on the cashew nut, because also someone here is Jacob Abere Mtalala is saying a good move. I wish also here at home Uhuru Kenyatta orders military to buy maize and milk from farmers when we stop cartels exploiting farmers. And very interestingly as well, Garo has actually captured this as well in today's Standard with this editorial cartoon that you can pick it up from the Standard. Right, there you go. It's all about policies, and these are some of the ministers who have been fired. The Minister of Agriculture there, who they've been personified by as cows here, and they're under the yoke, but he's cracking the whip as far as policies is concerned.
Has Tanzania gone nuts?
That's the question.
And those cows are going in reverse, I think. They're supposed to be plowing that land in a reverse gear.
They're facing the plow.
Oh, they're facing the plow.
So it's turning the other way around.
For the farmers among us.
Facing the farmers.
Does not make sense.
While as far as I'm concerned, this is misdirected policy.
Misdirected?
Misdirected, because market forces need to be able to buy that cashew nut and find a market.
But what if the market forces are not really working? People are gaming the system.
Then there's something wrong with the system.
If there's something wrong, then you crack the whip to rectify it.
Something is wrong inside the country. If they cannot find market outside for cashew nut, you can't do that kind of thing.
Okay, let's hear from Ambassador. If you may just have that particular.
I usually agree with the Professor, but on this occasion, I like to take a different route. Okay. Markets do fail. And if you see even in the case of farming as such, when there's a glut, farmers are desperate to get the product out of. Yes, you can organize the farmers, and there could be other ways of doing it, but you see what happens when there is that harvest time, and it only happens for a very short time from November to about March, when you have all these cashew nuts being harvested. The price drops drastically. People come and buy it at low prices, go to the national markets and sell it at high prices. I think there is market failure for sure, but how you organize it is another thing. Is perhaps, if the government decides then to empower farmers and give them a good return, keep this in stores and then release it to international market, so be it. But that aspect, I would say, is a move in the right direction, but it's not sustainable.
Thank you. Right, thank you. Let's see from, unless you want to weigh in on the Tanzania's cashew nut deal, but can we talk about Brexit and now the new optimism as far as now the new happy medium with the draft that they're really talking about, at least light at the end of a tunnel?
Probably, just quickly on the cashew nuts, I agree with you in terms of, and Tanzania being more of a developmental state, where the state runs the market, the market versus where the state interferes or is more bullish in the market. And yes, I think that's one of the things many of these African countries need to deal with. The market is again, if we let the market, like in Kenya, just open, free for all, for everybody, what happens to many traders? And that's why like coffee farmers and all these farmers suffer. So I think we need to start maybe injecting the state in the market. I'm not sure it's supposed to be like that dramatic with the military and that kind of thing. But like what Ambassador is saying here about having a proper policy to make sure the products are bought in advance, subsidy, government subsidy, like European farmers are supported by their governments. So that's something we need to think about. In terms of Brexit, yes, finally, I think it took quite some time. They seem to have a deal, but you can see some people are not happy, especially the conservative wing, that especially what's his name, the one who was supporting, leading the campaign.
Johnson.
Yes, Boris Johnson against Brexit.
Boris.
Yes, Boris. And so, and also it's going to be interesting to see also what the European Union, especially Germany and these other countries, think about, because they're still trying to iron out things to do with the customs union and movement of people.
The Irish border.
Pardon?
The Irish border as well.
The Irish border also is contested, and of course the support they got from that Theresa May got from some of the Irish parties. So it's going to be interesting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right, back to our hashtag Free Peter Biar Ajak. Freedom for Peter Biar Ajak. Please head over to that particular website, which is change.org, where you have all the details about Peter Biar Ajak. And so far, that has reached 17,815 people who have signed the petition. Please, if you may sign this petition to, of course, see the release of Peter Biar Ajak, please, that will be really, really helpful. I just want to run you by the clip briefly of who Peter Biar Ajak is, right? Just briefly, just run it, we'll cut it along the way, please. This is what he had to say about IGAD.
The whole concept is about power sharing. It's about dividing up the cake. This is what it has really essentially come down. So what IGAD is proposing is that the transitional government of national unity, this is Salva Kiir, Taban Dengai, and the group that is in Juba, including some of the political parties that are allied to the government, those of Martin Inea, as a transitional government of national unity and the parties allied to them in Juba, they will get 60% of all the cabinet positions. All right? And then it says the SPLMIO, this is the group of Riek Machar now. Riek Machar will get 25%. This is what the IGAD is proposing for them. This is for the SPLMIO here. And then you have another new entities that has emerged, number of different smaller armed group, including Paul Malong group that joined not so long ago. This group, they call themselves South Sudan Opposition Alliance. They're proposing to give them 10%. Then there is a group of former political detainees. This is the group of former Secretary General Pagana Mom, former Foreign Minister Denga Lor, and others. They will be getting 5%. Then there is also another group where they have another opposition entity. So essentially what this thing is, what IGAD is doing here is saying, let's divide up the cake. And based on the positioning on the ground, based on the political clout, based on the different positions and arguments that they have reached, this will be the sharing of the cake. Now they're proposing a cabinet of 42 ministers. This is a country that is extremely poor now, where soldiers have been going for months without getting salaries, where inflation is among the highest in the world. Yet IGAD is coming here to say that the cabinet is going to be increased from the present 32 cabinet ministers by another 10 ministers to 42. They are also proposing to increase the parliament from 400. Now our parliament was only 332 MPs. And then in the last agreement, IGAD increased it to 400. And now they are proposing to increase it to 440. They are also proposing that we have 3 vice presidents. So you have a first vice president, which will be appointed by the group of Riek Machar, the SPLMIO. You have a vice president that will be appointed by the government. And then you have a third vice president that will be appointed by a coalition of other opposition entities. So 3 vice presidents, 42 cabinet ministers, 440 MPs. This is the breakdown of the numbers of what IGAD is proposing. And this is at a time when the economy of South Sudan is extremely in tatters, where basically people have gone for months without getting their salaries, where basic products are very difficult to get. And we were talking about...
That is just a snippet of Peter Biar, Ajak, and you can head over now, as I've mentioned, to change.org to see his release. And of course, that particular statement also, I think, really rubbed the upper reaches of government the wrong way as well. And we want to thank our panelists this morning for also the rich stream of information we've had as far as, you know, standing on guard is concerned and looking at different facets of security here in the country, around East Africa, and just a bit of a world and the Brexit as well. And we thank you for your input this morning. We hope to, of course, see you next Wednesday. Thank you very much also for your valued company. As we're winding up, I'll just read a bit of tweets here. We have John Gidanga saying, I remember Biar Ajak with lots of nostalgia. He has been an illustrious panelist in this program, standing on guard, especially on matters touching on his home country, South Sudan. I really miss him. Thank you very much for your valued company.